A century ago, a jagged piece of land was traded like a consolation prize in a bloodless war, promising untold riches to anyone brave enough to claim it. Today, that same land, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, stands as a haunting enigma. While the South teems with millions and the roar of industry, the North remains a silent, dark expanse of ghost towns and hollowed mines. Below the surface of the freezing obsidian Great Lakes, thousands of shipwrecks are preserved in a watery tomb, guarding secrets that history has tried to bury. Why does one of the wealthiest resource hubs on the planet remain an isolated frontier? Is it a failure of geography, a lingering economic curse, or something far more sinister hidden in the winter gales? The answer lies not in what you see, but in what has been intentionally left behind. If you think you've already understood Michigan, stay with us until the very end of today's video, because the answer to the collapse of this freshwater empire lies not only in geography, but also in a brutal truth you've never heard before. Michigan's map is a geological anomaly, a fractured anatomy of land and water that defies the standard logic of American settlement. Unlike its Midwestern neighbors Ohio, Indiana, or Illinois, Michigan is the only state in the Union physically severed into two massive, disconnected peninsulas. It is a territory defined not by its soil, but by its relationship with four of the five Great Lakes: Superior, Michigan, Huron, and Erie. This unique positioning grants the state more than 3,000 miles of freshwater coastline, the longest of its kind on the planet. Yet, this vast access to water and space conceals a startling demographic paradox that has persisted for nearly 2 centuries. Of Michigan's 10,007,733 residents, the distribution is staggeringly uneven. If you draw a horizontal line through the center of the Lower Peninsula, you will find that over 80% of the population is concentrated in the southern tier. The southern half of the state is a corridor of industry and urban density, home to over 8 million people. Metro Detroit alone accounts for 4 million, followed by Grand Rapids with 1 million, and the sprawling suburbs of Lansing, Flint, and Ann Arbor. In stark contrast, the rugged north is a realm of top-heavy emptiness. The Upper Peninsula, UP, which comprises nearly 1/3 of Michigan's total land area, is home to a mere 3% of the population, roughly 300,000 people, spread across thousands of square miles of wilderness. This raises a chilling mystery that haunts Michigan's history. How did this state come to possess such a remote, severed limb, one completely isolated by geography? And why does it remain so desolate despite its massive scale? To find the answers to these modern paradoxes, we must peel back the layers of time, moving past the steel and concrete of the South to an era when Michigan was not a state defined by political borders, but a vast, sovereign network of water and wood. Thousands of years before the first European ships touched these waters, long before the term Michigan even existed, northern Michigan was the ancestral heart of the Anishinaabe, a powerful cultural and linguistic alliance known as the Council of Three Fires. This was a sophisticated political structure composed of 3 distinct yet unified nations: the Ojibwe, the older brothers and guardians of the faith and tradition; the Odawa, the middle brothers who were renowned as master traders and diplomats; and the Potawatomi, the younger brothers, who served as the keepers of the sacred fire. To view these people as mere nomadic wanderers would be a fundamental misunderstanding of their mastery over the land. They were in reality master ecologists who possessed a deep forensic knowledge of the Great Lakes' complex ecosystems. Using birch bark canoes, vessels of incredible engineering that were light enough to carry, but strong enough to navigate the treacherous, unpredictable swells of Lake Superior and Lake Huron, they established a civilization dictated by the rhythm of the seasons. In the spring, they moved to the highlands to tap maples for sugar. In the autumn, they gathered wild rice in the marshes. Most importantly, they built an intricate network of fishing sites within the Straits of Mackinac, a geographic choke point that became the economic center of their world. To the Anishinaabe, the North was never a wilderness to be conquered or tamed. It was a sacred, provider landscape that offered everything a civilization needed, provided its people possessed the skill and resilience to survive the crushing brutality of its winters. This indigenous silence was shattered in the early 1600s when the first ripples of European expansion reached the Great Lakes. The first to arrive were the French, specifically Jesuit missionaries, seeking souls and voyageurs seeking fortune. Driven by a voracious global demand for beaver pelts, the French realized that the North was not just a landmass, but a strategic crossroads for the global fur trade. They established outposts that remain the oldest permanent European settlements in the region. Sault Ste. Marie, founded in 1668, and Mackinac Island, which became the Gibraltar of the Great Lakes. For over a century, northern Michigan functioned as a French fur trading empire, a unique middle ground where European steel and cloth were bartered for the natural bounty of the lakes. However, the North's strategic value soon made it a prized pawn in a global chess match between the world's superpowers. Following the French and Indian War in 1763, the French were forced to cede their vast territories in Michigan to the British Crown. British rule, while relatively short in the context of history, was incredibly intense and fraught with friction. The indigenous tribes, led by figures like Pontiac, resisted this new occupation, recognizing that the British sought more rigid control than the French. Even after the Treaty of Paris in 1783 officially recognized the United States independence and handed the region to the fledgling American government, the British refused to evacuate. They maintained a stubborn military presence in lakeside forts, recognizing that whoever controlled the Straits of Mackinac controlled the interior of the continent. It wasn't until the conclusion of the War of 1812 that the British finally retreated, allowing the Stars and Stripes to truly fly over the Great Lakes. Yet, even with American sovereignty secured, the North remained as remote and inaccessible to the settlers on the East Coast as the surface of the moon. The technological Big Bang that finally opened the gates to Michigan occurred in 1825 with the completion of the Erie Canal. This was a revolutionary feat of engineering that fundamentally altered the geography of North America. By cutting a water route through the Appalachian Mountains and connecting the Hudson River in New York directly to Lake Erie, the canal slashed the cost of shipping and travel by a staggering 90%. Before the canal, reaching the Michigan Territory required a grueling, months-long overland journey through impenetrable forests and disease-ridden swamps. Afterward, a flood of New Englanders and European immigrants could board a boat in New York and step off in Detroit or the Mackinac Straits in a matter of days. This accessibility catalyzed a massive population boom, fueling the growth that would lead Michigan to be admitted as the 26th state of the Union on the 26th of January, 1837. The current map of Michigan, a state split into two iconic disconnected peninsulas was forged not through natural expansion, but through the heat of a bitter, nearly lethal political collision known as the Toledo War. This was a high-stakes standoff over a 468-square-mile sliver of land called the Toledo Strip, a marshy stretch of mud along the border of Ohio. In the 1830s, this strip was the 19th century equivalent of a gold mine. Its value didn't lie in its soil, but in its geography. It sat at the strategic mouth of the Maumee River. Controlling Toledo meant controlling the ultimate gateway to Lake Erie and the lucrative canal trade that was currently fueling the expansion of the American interior. The roots of this conflict were buried in a technical failure, a cartographic error. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 had attempted to define the border between the states using an inaccurate map. This error led both the state of Ohio and the Michigan Territory to claim the Strip as their own sovereign territory. By 1835, this administrative dispute reached a boiling point. Michigan was led by its boy governor, the 23-year-old Stevens T. Mason, a man of fierce conviction who refused to back down against the established political might of Ohio. Mason took the radical step of mobilizing a militia of over 1,000 armed men and marching them toward the border. Ohio's governor, Robert Lucas, a seasoned politician, responded in kind, dispatching his own state troops to the banks of the Maumee River. For months, the region teetered on the edge of violence. The two sides engaged in a high-stakes standoff, characterized by aggressive saber rattling, the arrest of government surveyors by rival militias, and heated political rhetoric that echoed through the halls of Washington, D.C. While the war is famously remembered as being bloodless, the only recorded casualty was a single, non-fatal stabbing of a sheriff's deputy. The geopolitical implications were dire. President Andrew Jackson found himself in an impossible position. With an upcoming election looming, he desperately needed Ohio's electoral votes. Consequently, the federal government intervened with an ultimatum. Michigan was told in no uncertain terms, if it wanted to end its status as a territory and be admitted as the 26th state of the Union, it had to surrender the Toledo Strip to Ohio. To sweeten this incredibly bitter pill, Congress offered a trade that was, at the time, considered a profound insult to the people of Michigan. If Michigan yielded the bustling port of Toledo to Ohio, it would be granted the western three-quarters of the Upper Peninsula, UP, a region that was currently part of the Wisconsin Territory. To the citizens of Michigan in 1836, this was a diplomatic disaster. The UP was widely viewed as a sterile, frozen wasteland, a remote, inaccessible wilderness so far removed from the cultural and population centers of Detroit that many felt it might as well have been located in another country. Public outcry was fierce and vocal. One prominent Detroit newspaper famously ridiculed the agreement, describing the trade as exchanging a diamond for a piece of charcoal. However, facing a political dead end with no other path to sovereignty, Michigan's leadership reluctantly accepted the terms. On the 26th of January 1837, Michigan was officially admitted to the Union. Ohio walked away with its strategic harbor, and Michigan was left with a vast, icy forest that seemingly no one else wanted. Just a few years after statehood, the worthless wilderness of the Upper Peninsula began to reveal its true, staggering nature. Government surveyors, tasked with mapping the rugged terrain, noticed something terrifying. Their compass needles were spinning wildly, erratic, and completely useless. They hadn't encountered a supernatural force. They had stumbled upon the Marquette Iron Range, one of the largest and purest deposits of iron ore ever discovered on Earth. Shortly after this discovery, The massive, native copper lodes of the Keweenaw Peninsula were unearthed, sparking the first mineral rush in American history. Nearly a full decade before the world's eyes turned to the 1849 California gold rush, America's first great mineral race was being fought in the freezing depths of the North. This was the Copper Rush. In 1841, state geologist Douglas Houghton published a report confirming what indigenous tribes had known for millennia. The UP sat upon the purest elemental copper deposits on Earth. Unlike copper found elsewhere, which is often trapped in ore and requires complex smelting, Michigan's native copper was found in massive, pure metallic chunks. By 1843, the rush was in full swing. This wasn't just a local venture. It was a global magnet for labor and capital. Picture a young immigrant miner from the tin mines of Cornwall or the hills of Ireland, stepping off a wooden schooner onto the rocky shores of Lake Superior. He entered a wilderness where the winter snow could reach 200 inches, literally burying houses to the rooftops. These men were lured by the promise of wealth, venturing into a landscape that was as lethal as it was lucrative. At the center of this industrial explosion was Calumet. At its peak during the Gilded Age, Calumet was not just a mining camp. It was a sophisticated, high-wealth metropolis that functioned as the heartbeat of the North. The city boasted an opulent opera house, dozens of ornate churches representing a dozen different languages, and a population that swelled to over 30,000 inches the immediate district. The wealth generated here was so immense that Calumet was seriously considered as a candidate for Michigan's state capital, nearly snatching the title from Lansing. The engine behind this prosperity was the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company, C&H. Between 1867 and 1884, C&H alone produced over half of the entire nation's copper. This was the metal that built modern America. It formed the telegraph wires that allowed the first instant communications and the electrical grids that lit the nation's cities. The mines themselves were marvels of engineering, with shafts plunging nearly 6,000 feet, over a mile, straight down into the Earth's crust. For decades, the UP was the industrial spine of the United States. The Toledo Compromise, once mocked as a failure, had transformed into arguably the greatest real estate deal in American history since the Louisiana Purchase. The mineral wealth extracted from the UP didn't just fuel the local Michigan economy, it became the literal engine of the American Industrial Revolution. By the late 19th century, the UP was the industrial heart of the continent, producing the iron that built the nation's transcontinental railroads and the steel skeletons of the first skyscrapers in Chicago and New York. Michigan had traded a 468-mile strip of mud for a mineral empire that would eventually generate billions of dollars in wealth. Yet, this sudden explosion of prosperity was a double-edged sword. It created a violent boom and bust cycle that left the North fundamentally vulnerable. The very minerals that made Michigan a global powerhouse also laid the groundwork for the profound silence and isolation that define the region today. The Great Exchange gave Michigan its land, providing the state with its unique two-peninsula shape. But it also set the stage for a demographic and economic divide that would never truly be bridged. The story of Calumet serves as a grim blueprint for the ghost towns that now define much of the northern Michigan landscape. Today, Calumet is a haunting shadow. The bustling streets that once rang with the sounds of commerce and multiple European dialects are silent. The grand sandstone buildings constructed to last centuries stand as weathered monuments to a vanished era of prosperity. Most of the mines are now flooded with the very lake water that once transported their cargo, their entrances sealed with concrete and iron. The city that should have been the New York of the North fell victim to the brutal reality of the physics of failure and market exhaustion. When the mines moved deeper, the costs of extraction skyrocketed. When copper was eventually discovered more cheaply in the open pit mines of the American West, the capital and the labor that built the North vanished almost overnight. The North was abandoned. This tension, the desperate, violent race to extract wealth followed by a sudden, total exodus, is the defining theme of northern Michigan. To understand why those massive mines eventually fell silent and why the North remains a wilderness of ghosts while the South flourishes, we must look to the harsh, unforgiving geography, the very force that granted this wealth and, ultimately, stripped it all away. This tension between the industrial might of the past and the desolation of the present is the key to the Michigan paradox. The state became a giant because of the North, but it grew to maturity in the South, leaving the Upper Peninsula as a majestic, resource-stripped monument to a time when Michigan's reach extended deep into the earth. The worthless forest became a treasure chest, but once the chest was emptied, the world moved on, leaving behind a land preserved by its own isolation. Michigan is a house divided, not by animosity, but by the sheer, unyielding force of geography, a state defined by a trade that no one wanted, but that made the nation what it is today. As Michigan grew into its identity as the 26th state, a profound and permanent divide began to solidify, carving the territory into two worlds that would evolve at vastly different velocities. While the southern Lower Peninsula began to flourish as a fertile agricultural haven and a nascent industrial hub, the North remained locked behind a physical and psychological iron curtain of ice and water. This was not merely a matter of distance, it was a geographic anomaly. The Upper Peninsula, UP, existed as a massive piece of land, administratively tied to Lansing but physically disconnected from the state's population centers. For more than a century after statehood, this enforced isolation was the defining reality of northern life. Before the iconic Mackinac Bridge was finally completed and opened on the 1st of November 1957, there was no permanent physical link between the two peninsulas. To cross the treacherous 5-mile gap of the Straits of Mackinac, travelers were forced to rely on a fleet of ferries. It was a journey that was slow, expensive, and frequently dangerous, dictated entirely by the unpredictable whims of the Great Lakes. This physical separation was more than a logistical inconvenience. It was a permanent barrier to development that shaped the very face of the state we see today. While the South was busy paving highways, building sprawling suburbs, and erecting the massive factories of the 20th century, the North remained a time capsule, a land bypassed by the industrial sprawl of the American Midwest. This isolation reached a terrifying, absolute peak during the winter months. Starting in December, as the Great Lakes began to freeze, the North was effectively severed from the modern world. In an era before commercial aviation, reliable long-distance radio, or sophisticated ice-breaking technology, the thick pack ice of the Straits became an impassable wall. For 5 months of every year, the people of the Upper Peninsula, who began to proudly identify themselves as Uppers, were left entirely to their own devices. This Siberian isolation forged a unique, rugged cultural identity that persists to this day. To live in the North was to accept a silent social contract with nature. You were on your own, and your survival depended on the strength of your character and the reliability of your neighbor, not a distant government hundreds of miles away in the south. The very ice and water that sought to keep the North isolated acted as a strange preservative, keeping its wilderness intact and its towns small while the rest of the country modernized at breakneck speed. However, the mineral empire granted to Michigan by the Great Exchange came with a hidden, lethal price, a permanent tether to some of the most treacherous waters on the planet. To understand why the North remains a desolate frontier, one must confront the environmental hostility of the Straits of Mackinac and the surrounding lakes. Michigan's geography is defined by a freshwater coastline exceeding 3,000 miles a distance, longer than the entire Atlantic seaboard of the United States. These are not the tranquil lakes of a postcard. Michigan sits at a volatile meteorological intersection where freezing Arctic air masses collide with moisture-rich winds from the Gulf of Mexico. This is the primary stage for the lake effect, a terrifying phenomenon where Arctic winds sweep over warmer, unfrozen lake surfaces, sucking up moisture with violent efficiency. The result is localized snow squalls of unimaginable intensity and the hurricane-force gales of November. In the snow belts of the UP, annual snowfall totals often exceed 200 to 300 inches, transforming the region into an icy prison. This atmospheric volatility has earned the waters of the North a grim title, the graveyard of the Great Lakes. An estimated 6,000 shipwrecks rest within these freshwater depths, with over 500 concentrated along the shipwreck coast of Lake Superior alone. Unlike the corrosive, salt-heavy oceans, these freezing, low-oxygen waters preserve vessels and their crews with haunting forensic precision. The lakebed is not a site of decay, but a massive, submerged museum of tragedy, where steel and wood remain frozen in time. The lethal power of this environment is best exemplified by the physics of failure seen in the tragedy of the SS Mataafa during the infamous Mataafa storm of 1905. On the 28th of November 1905, a storm system of such ferocity swept across Lake Superior that it crippled or destroyed nearly 30 vessels. The Mataafa, a 430-foot steel freighter, attempted to seek shelter in the Duluth Ship Canal while battling 70-mile-per-hour winds and blinding snow. The sheer force of the waves slammed the massive vessel against a concrete pier, grounding it just a few hundred yards from the shore. As thousands of helpless spectators watched from the beach, the ship was literally broken in two by the relentless pounding of the surf. The aft section, where 9 crew members were trapped, was quickly encased in a thick shroud of ice from the freezing spray. By morning, those men were found frozen to death in their bunks. It remains a chilling testament to a brutal truth. On the Great Lakes, the weather doesn't just sink you, it consumes you before you even go under. This relentless environmental hostility reveals the fundamental reason for the North's sparse population density. The region is structurally resistant to sustained, large-scale industrial urbanization. The physics of failure on the lakes, the reality that even the strongest steel hulls can be snapped like toothpicks, combined with the crushing seasonal isolation of the lake-effect winters, made the overhead cost of living and working in the North too high for the average citizen. While the southern Lower Peninsula was busy building climate-controlled factories and accessible suburbs, the North remained trapped in a cycle of extraction and survival. The very geography that provided the initial wealth, the vast lakes that allowed for the cheap transport of heavy ore, was the same geography that claimed the lives of the men who tried to harvest it. For over a century, Michigan's entire economy was essentially a high-stakes gamble against the weather. As the 20th century progressed, the easily accessible iron and copper veins began to dwindle. Simultaneously, the lethal unpredictability of the inland seas became too great a burden for a modern, efficiency-driven world. Michigan's economic center of gravity underwent a permanent shift, transforming the state from a mineral-rich northern frontier into a southern industrial powerhouse centered around the automotive might of Detroit. This transition left the Upper Peninsula to be slowly reclaimed by the encroaching forest and the silent ghosts of the deep. The Empire of the North eventually fell silent, not because the resources were entirely gone, but because the brutal cost of extraction became unsustainable. Today, the North stands as a majestic, resource-stripped monument to a time when Michigan's reach extended deep into the earth and across the most dangerous freshwater on the planet. Driving across the Mackinac Bridge today feels like a transition between eras. You leave behind the modern, fast-paced industrial South and enter a realm that still feels tethered to its ancestral and frontier roots. It is a land preserved by its own hostility, a graveyard that never truly gives up its secrets, where the silence of the forest is only broken by the distant, rhythmic tolling of a lighthouse bell, mourning the thousands of ships that the gales of November claimed as their own. The North remains a wilderness of ghosts, a place where the physics of failure isn't just a technical term, but a lived history of a people who dared to defy the Great Lakes and lost. Michigan is a state of two extremes, a demographic and cultural anomaly where the physical separation of its two peninsulas has carved out a chasm unlike any other in the American landscape. To examine a population map of Michigan is to witness a study in radical contrast, a physical embodiment of the Rust Belt legacy. Of the state's 10.08 million residents, a staggering 80% are compressed into the southern half of the Lower Peninsula. This region, characterized by its flat, fertile topography, provided the perfect canvas for the sprawling industrial and transit infrastructure of the 20th century. Here, the Motor City of Detroit acts as the definitive gravitational center, anchoring a massive high-density industrial corridor that encompasses Grand Rapids, Lansing, and Ann Arbor. In this southern realm, life is defined by hyperconnectivity, a grid of high-speed interstate highways, and a sophisticated, diversified economy rooted in global automotive manufacturing, advanced healthcare, and burgeoning tech sectors. Cities like Detroit and Grand Rapids represent the evolution of the American dream. Detroit remains a global titan of industry that essentially put the world on wheels, while Grand Rapids has transformed into a diversified medical and technological powerhouse. These are cities of light, noise, and constant movement, where the geography allowed for endless suburban expansion and concrete connectivity. However, the moment you cross the 5-mile span of the Mackinac Bridge, that modern world effectively vanishes into the rearview mirror. The North is a realm of top-heavy emptiness, a vast geographic expanse that defies the logic of modern urbanization, while the Upper Peninsula, UP, comprises a massive 29% of Michigan's total land area. It is home to a mere 3% of its population, roughly 300,000 people scattered across a wilderness larger than several New England states combined. The statistical disparity is jarring. While population density in the industrialized South can easily exceed 175 people per square mile, that number plummets to fewer than 19 people per square mile once you enter the rugged, forested interior of the UP. This is a landscape where nature has decisively reclaimed the upper hand. In the north, the sprawling multi-lane expressways of the south are replaced by winding two-lane roads that navigate impenetrable forests and rocky shorelines. The urban landscape of the north serves as a stark scorecard of this division. Compare the southern hubs to cities like Saginaw or Marquette. While Marquette remains a proud cultural anchor for the UP, it exists largely as a living museum. The towering ore docks that once dominated its shoreline, massive concrete cathedrals designed to feed the nation's hunger for iron, now stand largely as silent monuments. The decline of Great Lakes shipping and the shuttering of the most profitable deep earth mines throughout the mid to late 20th century stripped the North of its primary economic engine. What was once the Empire of the North has transitioned into an open-air museum, a landscape dotted with ghost towns and rusted machinery, preserved by the very cold that once made it so difficult to settle. This environmental and economic isolation has forged more than just a different lifestyle. It has created a distinct cultural identity, the Upers. Derived from the phonetic pronunciation of the initials UP, the term describes a population hardened by what can only be described as a Siberian resilience. To be a Upper is to consciously embrace a lifestyle that the vast majority of Americans would find fundamentally intolerable. The answer to why they stay is found in a fierce frontier-style independence that has largely disappeared from the American mainstream. For the people of the North, the trade-off for economic hardship and physical labor is a profound, almost spiritual sense of freedom. It is a connection to a pristine, untouched wilderness that serves as a total rejection of the frantic pace of the South. The UP is a bastion of self-reliance, where the ability to make do with limited resources is worn as a badge of honor. It is a culture bound together, not by the pursuit of wealth, but by the shared struggle against the lethal gales of November and the annual onslaught of 300 inches of snow. Yet this fierce cultural pride is frequently tinged with a deep-seated sense of political abandonment. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, a narrative of neglect took root. Many in the North felt that the state government in Lansing possessed no true understanding of the UP's unique challenges. This friction between the industrial masters in the South and the resource providers in the North gave birth to one of the most persistent separatist movements in U.S. history, the push for the state of Superior. The dream of a 51st state reached its fever pitch during the 1960s and 70s. Proponents argued that the UP was being systematically mined for its natural resources by the South while receiving a pittance in return. In 1962, this movement gained such traction that the creation of the state of Superior was actually debated in the state legislature. While it never cleared the legal thresholds for statehood, it remains the most powerful symbol of the Upper identity, a standing declaration that the North is a sovereign land with its own history of suffering. The uneven distribution of Michigan's population is not a historical accident. It is the definitive result of a mechanical synergy, the combination of favorable, accessible geography in the South and the brutal, isolated environmental reality of the North. The South offered a path to the future through the assembly line. The North offered a path into the earth that eventually hit a dead end. Yet, there is a profound message in this desolation. Southern Michigan may possess the bright lights and economic power, but it is northern Michigan that holds the true soul and the tragic secrets of the American story. The North is where the raw materials of the American Industrial Revolution were bled from the ground at an incredible human cost. It is a land that remembers the price of progress, a price paid in the dark of the mines and the fury of the lake storms. Today, Michigan remains a house divided, not by political animosity, but by the sheer, unyielding force of its own geography. To truly understand Michigan is to realize that it is two distinct nations existing under one name, one built on the precision of the assembly line, and the other forged in the subterranean fires of the copper mines and the unforgiving ice of the Great Lakes. This divide is not a flaw in the state's design, it is its defining characteristic, a land of ghosts and giants. As our journey concludes, we are left with a singular, haunting image, a lonely lighthouse standing watch on a frozen, wind-swept point of Lake Superior. Its beam cuts through the blinding white of a winter squall, looking out over the gray, churning waters where thousands of shipwrecks and tens of thousands of lives still rest in the silence of the deep. To know Michigan is to respect the machinery of the South, but to truly know Michigan is to stand in the silence of the North and listen to the echoes of the past, acknowledging that while the mines may be empty and the ships may be gone, the spirit of the people who defied this geography remains as unyielding as the iron itself. My dear friends, thank you for walking this journey with me into the very heart of the North. If you carry a personal story, a family memory, or any connection to this rugged land, please share it in the comments below. It is your voice that keeps these echoes from fading into the deep. If this exploration moved you, I invite you to like, share, and follow so we can continue uncovering these hidden chapters of history together. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in our future videos on the channel.